This is the Morning Tailgate.
I'll just tell the Raider Nation that we have to earn your trust. We got to earn those seats in the stands by putting a great product on the field. Words will not do it. It's our actions.
With Vin Sapienza, Vinny Bonsignor, and Clay Baker on Raider Nation Radio 920.
Just a credit to John for getting so much competition in that room, and we want to keep pushing the starters and young guys like Zeke. Have had some good springs. Happy with his work ethic. Again, just like everybody else on the roster, what is he going to do when the pads come on? What are you going to do, Zeke? If you're listening.
What are you going to do, Zeke? What are you going to do, Raiders? What are you going to do, Sleepers? What are you going to do, Raiders that are under the radar right now as we head to training camp, transitioning from everything that we saw in the spring to now fully pads are coming on. The preseason is just around the corner. Who among the Raiders that are flying under the radar right now, maybe not nationally, or maybe not within the fan base, maybe a little bit more nationally, but who among the Raiders that might be considered a sleeper going into training camp, under the radar gem, somebody that you've got your eye on as training camp is getting ready to start, somebody that you think is going to surprise some people once those pads actually get on? Welcome back to the Morning Tailgate Show on Raider Nation Radio 920 AM. Vinny, Clay, and Connor doing his thing on the boards and keeping us on track and doing great things in what he's doing, and that's what we're talking about today, and we want your thoughts. 702-365-9200. You heard Klint Kubiak there. That was at the very end of minicamp, I should say. And I'd asked him about Zeke Massis. I've been hearing a lot of good things about Zeke. When we were able to see him during the open practice periods, during OTAs and minicamp, he was obviously running with the bigger teams. When I say that, the number ones, the number twos at times, and that's always a telltale that this guy has climbed up a little bit of a ladder, at least in that setting. And now the challenge for him is to transition that and the impressiveness that he had during that part of the calendar into training camp. And that's our question to you. We want 5 players that you have your eye on that might not be, not your Brock Bowers and your Ashton Genties. We get that. Your Fernando Mendozas. Obviously, those guys are guys and players that we're all going to keep an eye on. But do you have 5 players that you are sort of putting over to the side and saying, you know what, once training camp starts, I got my eye on this guy. I think that this player has a lot to offer, and maybe not a lot of people are talking about him. Zeke Massis, the 5th-round pick from Cal, cornerback from Cal, surprised a lot of people this spring. Who do you have your eye on in that regard? Clay, it's funny because the spring, there's a great window and a great lens to look at things through the spring, but we've all seen the guys that flashed in that setting, and then all of a sudden when the pads came on, when games started coming around in the preseason, they kind of take a step back. But we've also seen guys. I remember seeing Nate Hobbs for the first time in the spring, going, "Who the heck is that?" And then I had to look down on my notebook, and I was like, "Oh, that's Nate Hobbs. That's that 5th-round pick from Illinois." But right off the bat, instantaneously, Nate Hobbs just stood out to me. We've seen that over the years, and I know that there's some Raiders that are going to do that looked good in the spring, and then all of a sudden they're going to show up. They're going to be ready to go, and they're going to make their mark. It's just inevitable that happens this time of year.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. There's something about the pads that forms like a line in the sand, right? Are you willing to go a little bit further? Does your game translate once we start getting aggressive? But when you think about somebody like Hezekiah Massis, who's coming in as a rookie, he himself has played, in college, 49 games between FIU, Florida International, and Cal. This is somebody that's, not just new to the position. He is somebody that has been playing a lot of ball in college, and now he comes over into the pros. I would have to think that he carries himself with a little bit of a leverage, especially just because he's, a 5th-round pick doesn't mean that he's not ready to go and try to make early contributions. And I would have to think for somebody like, Hezekiah Massis looking around, taking a look at the guys that are there right now, I would feel like I have a strong chance to make some a pivotal point in this point of the season coming up in camp that I can go and show people what I'm about. And no doubt about it, when he was on the field, this is somebody who had 18 passes defended, 5 interceptions, and is somebody that really kind of really ran around the field and ran towards the ball. And if you were looking for somebody to go and match a philosophy of getting to the ball, you couldn't ask for a whole lot more than a guy picked at 175.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I noticed this last night. I was at the NBA Summer League, and I watched maybe 3 games yesterday, and they were all NBA games, NBA teams, and I was really struck by the level of talent and the level of just it felt like maturity, body-wise, mentality-wise, playing-wise. Mm-hmm. And it kind of dawned on me, and I was having a conversation with somebody from the NBA about how, yes, you're always going to have your one-and-dones in college basketball now. You're just high-end guys. And, there were definitely a couple of those players that were on the court, last night. Your, top 5 picks or so, many of whom are just your one-and-dones. Your special players that went to college for 1 year and said, I know I'm making great money NIL-wise, but the real money for me and my next step is immediately to the NBA. And so you see those guys out there, and a couple of those guys really stood out. But more than that, to me, are players that have stayed that now because of NIL, as opposed to just a few years ago, let's just say 6-7 years ago, where everyone was one and done. If you were a second round pick or a late first round pick, most of the time and a lot of the time, you're talking about guys that were just one and dones because there was no money in college basketball. The money was in the NBA. Why even waste any time if I have some NBA aspirations? I need to get there as quickly as possible. Now that's no longer the case, because college is paying money and paying pretty good money. And nowadays, if you're a second-round pick, you're going to probably make less than you were making if you were a pretty high-end NIL guy, less than you were making in college. So it makes sense now to stay in college. And I say all of that to say that the NBA is getting more experienced players as a result of that. The NBA loves that. Like I said, you're always going to have your one and dones. But when you get guys that have been in college now for 3, sometimes 4 years, and then they just look more mature, they play more mature, their body's more mature, everything. Well, that's also happening in football. You just mentioned how many games Zeke Massis, played in his college career. Fernando Mendoza, started over 30 games. He's got a vast amount of experience going from college, now to the NFL. And guys are staying longer in college in football because they're getting paid now. And so if you're going to get paid roughly the same amount, between college and the NFL on a yearly basis, why not stay one more year in college and continue to develop and continue to put good film out there for the NFL? And so you're getting more mature players. So it doesn't surprise me when you look at a Zeke Massis and you look at kind of how savvy he looked during practice and everything that I'm hearing about him from Raider people in terms of keep an eye on this guy. Well, it makes a lot of sense that this is a very experienced football player from college, now to the NFL, and he carries himself that way, and that's clear. Another guy that from the second week after the rookies started getting in and getting involved, and when they were joined by the veterans, Kion Sloan, the defensive end from North Carolina State, an undrafted a player from North Carolina State. This is why I'm putting him on my list of under the radar players to keep an eye on. I mean, it was immediate, Clay, when I started reaching out to people. Hey, who should I keep an eye on? Blah blah blah. Some player that surprised every single time. Kion Sloan was mentioned. Keep an eye on Kion Sloan. So he's another player that had a lot of experience in college, did a lot of nice things in college. Wasn't enough to get him drafted, but that's okay. We've seen plenty of times before where undrafted players are able to come in and make a team. There's plenty of room and plenty of opportunity, and I think a guy like Kion Sloan is gonna get that opportunity now. Can he take what he showed in OTAs and minicamp and the offseason program? Can he take that into training camp when the pads come on? All I got to say is this. if there's any doubts about that, go put his tape on at North Carolina State. I don't think that's going to be a problem at all. That doesn't mean that he's going to start. That doesn't mean he's going to even make the team or have a role. But in terms of physicality, in terms of somebody that shows up when the pads come on, put his tape on from North Carolina State, and you can see a player that you can easily see transfer to that setting once training camp starts.
Certainly has the body type for it, doesn't it? You know, like when you think of a 6'4", 245, he certainly seems like that guy that is going to have that kind of a body type. But all that time spent in college certainly develops a certain kind of player that you feel is more well-rounded. You know, you could feel like enough time has been spent for somebody at that position to not only show what you could do up against the run, but also against the pass, because that's the kind of skill level that's going to get you on and keep you in perhaps the NFL for a little bit longer than people would expect, because you might not be the name guy, but do you have the skills of a name guy? And for Keon Sloan, it's like I wonder what kind of chances he would get. Just based on, the availability of certain guys that are ahead of him at the perhaps outside linebacker position. How do you feel like his positioning is for this team? Because, there's a lot of guys like ahead of him, but can he kind of like find transition as being a versatile player in that kind of middle linebacker, outside linebacker zone?
Yeah, a couple things. Number one, he played 38 games in college. So started at Utah State, played 2 seasons at Utah State before moving on to North Carolina State. Started 13 games, 12 games his first 2 years, and 13 games his last year. This is a guy that can rush the passer with 11 career sacks. Is more of that edge rusher type of a guy, but also could drop back in pass coverage. So he's got that skill set. And I got to say this: when you say a lot of guys, I don't even know that that's the case necessarily. I think that there's a lot of people that are starting on an even keel because, as we've been talking about for a long time now, Clay, the Raiders need production, somebody that's going to be able to show that they could get after the passer and play that edge position, play that outside linebacker position. So, aside from Maxx Crosby, obviously, this is a point of contention that we've had for a long time in terms of, where's the reliability beyond just that? So when we're talking about an opportunity, I think it's an open slate for a lot of these guys, and I think Keon Sloan, along with Kwity Paye is going to play. Malcolm Kuntz obviously is going to play, but beyond that, I think it's wide open for a guy like Keon Sloan. I
wonder if Sloan would be battling somebody like Kieran Crawford, and I wondered even if Malcolm Kuntz is wondering how safe is my position here. It shouldn't be that safe. He's on a 1-year deal. He's on a 1-year deal. He's got to prove something at this point. And it almost seems like that year where 8.5 sacks. It seems like in long distance memory. It's just like, remember when? And it seems like a long time ago. And Malcolm Kuntz, that potential that you came into the league with, that's gone. Now you really have to start proving it. And somebody like Sloan could go and start making some major waves. And I would even think that nobody is really safe, because even if Kwity Paye, is getting some reps, but if he's not getting towards the quarterback, but someone else is, all the more reason for Rob Leonard to look that way.
Yeah, and a guy like Keon Sloan and Keon Crawford, I think their first real pathway to playing, in Keon's case, without a doubt, special teams. I'm sure Crawford figures into the special teams angle as well. But the first thing that both of them need to do is show that, hey, is there a role for you? You're not going to be the starter. I mean, Keon Crawford has a chance, I think, to maybe, push for a starting job. But let's just say that, that's kind of not that it's preordained, but Kwity Paye and Maxx Crosby are going to be, your defensive ends and kind of solidify that depending on how they're lined up. Whether it's in the 3-4 or traditional 4-3, however that front looks. But can Keon Sloan Sloan and can Keon Crawford show enough during training camp to say, hey, look, and as the season progresses, I might not be an everyday or every down player right now, but I'm doing enough and showing you enough just to get on the field in some packages. So get some snaps, whether it's 15 to 20 snaps, 25 snaps per game. I do think that the Raiders are extremely open-minded to finding playmakers and players that can produce in that kind of a condensed role.
Yeah, and he provides a lot of special things that, for a guy his size, his pro day, his vertical was 35.5. That's excellent for somebody of that size. And he also has that kind of temperament where he is very aggressive, violent, somebody that has, that what people regard as like a high motor. And I wonder if, somebody like Sloan matches the intensity of what Rob Leonard is really looking for as being aggressive. And we've talked over the past few days, just talking about, what could be the identity of what Rob Leonard wants to do. And everyone always says aggressive. And maybe Sloan is one of those guys that kind of like, is a sleeper coming into this moment of the season, where you say we need to find guys who want to be here, but also have the ability, the strength, but also match the temperament of what Rob Leonard's looking at. And I wonder if that might give him the edge, because that certainly is one of the reasons why he was brought into the Raiders as an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, and when you put the tape on and you talk to people, I think the thing that jumps out at you and is verbalized to you is he's a guy that plays with his hair on fire. So I think that that intensity that you're talking about, that's there. I don't see that. I don't necessarily see that changing. He's got to channel it in the right way in the NFL. But he's one of those guys, and John Spytek talks about this all the time. Do you love football? And I think that was a it's definitely been a trend or in terms of who John Spytek has brought into the building. Whether it's in free agency or in the draft or undrafted free agency, are guys that have a real passion for football. And I think when you look at somebody like Keon Sloan, that just jumps out at you when you put the tape on and look at the production. All right, I gave you two. Do you have a couple that you are keeping your eye on in terms of sleepers or under the radar players heading into training camp?
Well, it seems like I say his name over the past couple of years, where I feel like Michael Mayer is going to take that next step forward. And I feel differently about this right now because of scheme-wise, the way Klint Kubiak and the Seahawks last year used 22 personnel. Having that kind of set where you got the tight ends on the field, and you could see how the Seahawks were very effective in doing so, getting 6.8 of their total snaps out that way. Excuse me again. I get kind of choked up when I talk about sleepers. when you have Michael Mayer in a two tight end set, obviously you're going to have a lot of exposure for somebody like Brock Bowers and possibly even getting a career season out of him. But what I have noticed is that last year for the Raiders, they only ran 22 personnel on less than 5 plays total. So maybe getting more an advanced look at somebody what Michael Mayer could do here, finally having an offensive-minded coach that understands what Mayer is able to do. And I think looking at A.J. Barner, excuse me, I get emotional. A.J. Barner last year, a tight end that really only got 30 catches in his rookie year. He found a home with the Kubiak offense. 52 catches, 519 yards, 6 touchdowns, and 26 first downs. Michael Mayer could be now somebody that is in an offense where people recognize what he's able to do. And even if it gets to a point where Kirk Cousins and Mendoza are starting to feel a lot of heat from the offensive line, Michael Mayer is a guy that still can be found as an outlet pass, as somebody that can go and be found in the flat. He knows how to turn towards the ball, and he could be like even a rookie quarterback's best friend. I'd like to see in this round where Kubiak really understands the importance of having that kind of personnel, but also having that kind of action out of a tight end. And when Kubiak was the passing game coordinator in San Francisco, he really hooked up with Kittle. Kittle had a great year with 90 targets and over 1,000 yards and 65 catches. So having that kind of guy like Kubiak in an offensive system that really rewards tight ends, this could be that year where Michael Mayer takes that step that we always felt he had in his final year of contract with the Raiders.
Yeah, I think Michael Mayer has a chance to have a little bit of a breakout season. Now, I know they didn't play 22 personnel a lot, but they were close to 60% in terms of 12 personnel. So, and Michael Mayer played 47% of the snaps last year, 465 snaps. When so the Raiders were a very heavy 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, 1 running back. I'll be curious to see if they go to 22 with 2 running backs and 2 tight ends. How many times they do that? Some of that's going to be predicated on, who that second running back is. Are you looking at a fullback perhaps in that situation, along with another tight end? So that'll be kind of interesting to see if they go to 22 personnel. But I know that they've always been a heavy 12 personnel team. One of the reasons why is because they can't get the job done blocking, from their offensive line, so they need that extra tight end in run blocking, and Michael Mayer has been a big part of that. What I would like to see for Michael Mayer is for those 400 and some odd snaps, those 47% of the snaps that he plays on offense, to translate to more looks in the pass game. We know that he can block. That's
Absolutely.
one of his strengths and why he gets on the field as much as he does. But there has to be and should be some room for him to be able to catch the ball as well. I'd love to see Michael Mayer get more involved, because I think he's a weapon. He's somebody that can be very well, really effective in that part of the game. Hey, real quick, since 1942, guys, Sal's Mexican restaurants have been serving the best Mexican food in California's Central Valley. From their award-winning salsas to all their classics like chili carne and chili verde, they've been go-to restaurants for multiple generations. But here's the thing. You don't even have to be in California to enjoy this great food. All you got to do is go to salsmexicanrestaurant.com. That's salsmexicanrestaurant.com. To get hooked up, you go online, you put your order in, whatever you order, wherever you are, it'll get shipped to you. And this way, your next party, your next family get-together, or your next tailgate is taken care of. However, if you live in the Central Valley, or maybe you're passing through, make sure to stop by their locations in Selma, Fresno, or Madera. When you do, ask for Sal, Carl, or any of their managers, and let them know that the Morning Tailgate sent you. Or again, just go to salsmexicanrestaurant.com.
Vince, Vinny, and Clay want to hear from you. Call or text the show at 702-365-9200. Now, back to the Morning Tailgate.
Gino, deep drop, throws near side for Best. Caught at the Texans 40, angling 30, and dropped at the Houston 22-yard line. Gino lobbed it over his shoulder in stride, and Best did the rest. It's a pickup of 36 yards.
Welcome back to the Morning Tailgate on Raider Nation Radio, 920 a.m. Vinny Bonsignor, Clay Baker, and Connor Collins here with you on a Wednesday, and we're talking sleepers. Look, training camp is getting ready to start here in less than 2 weeks now, believe it or not. Here we go. But, look, every team needs their draft class to hit, and, it's so automatic to think about when the draft class, your first round, second round pick, third round pick, but then you start getting into your fourth rounders and your fifth rounders and your sixth rounders and your seventh rounders, and maybe you don't have as much information on those guys. Maybe you're a little bit more fixated on the top guys, which is totally understandable. But the backbone of your football team, you have to hit on those guys that are those day 3 picks. Let's put it that way, and the guys that are undrafted free agents. And time again, you look across the NFL, guys that seemingly come out of nowhere, and it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that that's a guy to keep an eye on. And whether it's visually seeing them at practice or seeing them flash in a preseason game, you're like, whoa, okay, who is this guy? And that's what we're asking. We want your thoughts, 702-365-9200. Granted, we haven't seen any of these guys yet in training camp, but as you prepare for training camp, as you think about training camp, and as you think about some players beyond the obvious ones, beyond the Fernando Mendozas and the Ashton Genties and the Brock Bowers and guys like that you are super excited to see in training camp, and understandably so, who are some guys that are flying under the radar that you've got your eye on? We've listed a few of the guys, already. Kion Sloan, the defensive end from North Carolina State, a guy that I'm keeping an eye on, and I think a lot of people are as well. Zeke Massis, the 5th-round pick, cornerback from Cal. He just has a smoothness to his game that is really apparent. As Clay pointed out, he played a whole bunch of college football. You're going to start seeing that more. You're going to start seeing far more mature, advanced players. And another part of that, Clay, that I like, and I think the NFL is really appreciative of. The big unknown with college players going to, whether it's the NFL or college basketball to the NBA, is, all right, what's this going to look like when we put some money in his pocket? Because let's face it, when you don't have anything and all of a sudden you have a lot, it can change a lot. It could change some of your habits off the field. It could change some of your want to a little bit. Now that you've got paid, are you satisfied? Are you, are you content? Do you want even more? How are you going to handle that? Are you going to take a step back in terms of your dedication and devotion because now all of a sudden you've got your payday? Well, a lot of that, Clay, has also been eliminated because guys are coming into the league now, whether it's the NBA or the NFL, with pretty big bank accounts. You look at C.J. Carr over at Notre Dame. I want to say he's making $3 million a year on his NIL and the pay that he gets in college. Arch Manning's making a whole bunch of money. And it goes all the way down to people like Zeke Massis. He made money in college. That's why there's guys that have played that started their careers 1 year as Kion Sloan did. What did we say? Colorado State, and then next thing you know, he's at North Carolina State. Why the heck do you think he went to North Carolina State? They offered him money, right? And he got a payday at North Carolina State. But that's one other consideration that you don't have to be as curious about because you already have evidence how guys have handled their money because they've got paid in college.
And they've also had to learn money skills because of that. They've actually had to go and mature. And you're right, there is a major difference of when you're coming from something where you're perhaps, as we recall, how most college players made so little money that once they first started making some money, their identity changed because their priorities changed. Things could be taken care of that, you've been waiting for this moment, for this big payday. You're taking care of your family. You're taking care of yourself. You're trying to live a lifestyle that you've been looking at but never could ever attain. And now we see, like, even just at the very base level, how university revenue sharing in college, where universities can allocate millions towards player compensation, even top tier Power 4 conference starters in college football, could earn anywhere between $500,000 and $2 million. This is a great difference than what we see prior to 4 to 5 years ago.
Yeah, for sure, and so it's a little bit easier to get a read on that because again, that was a huge question. It's a question that they still ask, when you meet face to face with these players. Hey, what are you gonna, how hungry are you still going to be when all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of zeros along with some big numbers, in front of them in your bank, and can we rely on you to be able to that we can trust you when you're away from the facility, and all of a sudden you've got some money in your pocket. It's just less of a consideration, and I know that the NFL appreciates that. On top of the fact that you're just getting more physically mature players that have been in college a little bit longer now, and their bodies have had some extra time, some extra years to be able to develop, and then also you're talking about guys that get on the field a lot, and there's more tape to watch. So there isn't just 15 games. In a lot of cases now, there's 35 games to go watch. And I have a question for you before we get to my next batch of underrated players that I got my eye on. What do you think about this new? You've got 5 years to play in college football now. You don't have to redshirt. There's none of that. You just got you have 5 years. That's it to get it done. What do you think about that rule change?
It's good. I think it's one in which it puts a timeline now, because when you saw what the timeline was during the COVID era, it almost seemed like it was indefinite. And how much could you play the system and to keep playing and finding if you want to be a vagabond and trying to latch on to other teams over over the years as you start trying to find a certain sentence. It puts now a timeline of how serious are you going to be to go and be a finished product by the end of your college career to make it to the next level, because everyone's going to be now graded on the same scale now. As far as time is concerned, are you making the most of your time? And also, are you aligning yourself with the kind of belief that, John Spytek, when he says we want people who love football, he's not the only one. There's a lot of GMs that want that, and it's a philosophy that in which that you're going to be a product that comes out of college, but you're not going to be finished. Do you love football enough to where you're going to evolve, where you're going to not only push yourself physically, but mentally and psychologically, and doing all the little things that make you better? And that includes staying late, doing a lot of film study, and growing each and every week. As Tom Brady was kind of saying in that one clip we played, I want to see increases of improvement every hour. So do you love this game enough? Do you love this sport enough and this career enough that you're going to continually evolve and put in the hard work, because it's not for everybody? And perhaps this new timeline in college could kind of show and kind of like at least maybe exemplify the players that are going to be in that realm.
Yeah, and I think it's fair. I think it's a fair amount of time for players to get their eligibility in college. And I think from covering college football as I did working in Los Angeles, talking to coaches who there were freshmen that you get a certain previously you would have a certain amount of games before you crossed over the redshirt threshold, and you didn't always want to waste somebody's redshirt season as a freshman because you're already thinking about year 2, year 3 down the line. You don't want to burn eligibility. And so there were hard decisions to make sometimes for some of these high-end freshman players of, guys that may not have even been starters, but maybe they were a special teams demon, or maybe they were a guy that and a player that you had built a little bit of a package for and was starting to become really effective. And you get into like week 6, week 7, where look, we got one more game to use for this guy before we burn his redshirt season. And sometimes you just had to play that game of, okay, we'll waste this redshirt season and then regret that a couple years down the line, or say, you know what, we care more about the future than we do the present. Unfortunately, we got to make a difficult decision, so we're gonna park him over on the sideline and not waste his redshirt season. In this case, it doesn't matter anymore. You just have 5 years. Period! Exclamation point. That's it. From the minute you arrive on campus, your clock starts ticking, and you've got 5 years to get it in. And to me, that removes those kind of hard decisions that coaches had to make, and sometimes players as well, because you're like, I don't want to burn my redshirt season right here. I want to preserve that and keep my eligibility going. Now that's no longer even a consideration, which I think, Clay, is a good thing. It
is, and like you said, like the clock begins, full time in that first year, or you start the academic year immediately following the athlete's 19th birthday. Isn't that something like that? Somewhere they got some age rules in there too. This is smart. You needed to kind of adopt these new rules and legislation because the landscape in college football is constantly changing now in this modern era, and you don't want too much regulation. But this was one of which it seemed like this was almost kind of like a unanimous across the board kind of deal to adopt this new rule and this eligibility model. I think nothing good can. I think a lot of good can come from it, and this might be just the beginning of perhaps maybe a little more regulation down the road, just to make sure that there's everybody on the same playing field and you're not getting a lot of 6-year seniors.
Well, I'll tell you this. There's a lot of coaches out there that are saying, please give us more regulation. Because right now it's kind of the wild, wild west with NIL and the transfer portal. So, and I think that, there's a lot of movement toward we're headed on the right track. Players should absolutely get paid. Players should absolutely have freedom to move around if they wish. If there's a better offer someplace else, this is America. We live in a capitalist society.
No doubt.
Why should we handcuff somebody from making a little bit more money if some money is available to them? However, there needs to be more regulation in how that is regulated and how that is governed. There's a way, I think, to do that, and I think a lot of coaches would just like a few more rules in place to make sure that there's just a little bit more control of it without going too far in the other direction of denying players, an opportunity to move on if they want for a better payday. So hopefully. Go ahead.
Well, it was funny because, as you said, the payday itself. I mean, there were a few cases where college athletes were trying to sue to remain in college longer for financial reasons, to win another additional year of eligibility by suing the NCAA over medical waiver.
Absolutely.
That was getting dangerous because it almost made you feel like, when is this going to end?
Right. Well, it has ended now. You got 5 years to get it in, so I think that's a good thing, a step in the right direction. We'll see what else they do in terms of the transfer portal and NIL. And I know that we've got a word of the day coming.
Oh, I know. I can't believe it. We're in the middle of the summer of fun, brought to you by Raider Nation Radio 920 and Terribles, with great vacations each and every week featured all around North America. And this week, it's the Great Mississippi River Cruise, where you get 5 nights stay on the Mississippi Delta on the cruise cabin up and down the Big Muddy. We take care of your flights, the port fees, or you could just take the cash, $3,000. This is how you enter. You text in the word of the day to 702-365-9200. The word of the day today is cabin, C-A-B-I-N, cabin. Text cabin in to 702-365-9200 for your chance to win. Here, the Summer of Fun, brought to you by Raider Nation Radio 920 and Terribles. Coming up next, more of your thoughts on the phones and text line as we talk about your sleeper candidates here for the Raiders on Raider Nation Radio 920.
We'll take your comments and questions on X. Follow us at RNR920AM. Let's dig in to the morning tailgate on Raider Nation Radio 920.
Welcome back to the Morning Tailgate Show, Raider Nation Radio, 920 AM. We are talking about sleepers. We're talking about under-the-radar players for the Raiders as they head to training camp. Next on my list, Clay, is Malik Benson, the wide receiver.
Oh, nice.
From Oregon, and Malik was drafted in the 6th round from Oregon. And it's interesting because I always wanted to do this column, Clay, because I sometimes would think about this when I'm stuck in traffic, like on the freeway, and I'm just looking around, and there's all these people that are stuck in the freeway with me, and everyone is headed somewhere, right? They're going to work, they're going to a doctor's appointment, they're going to pick up their kids, but the point is like they're all headed someplace. And in my mind, the name of the column was everybody has a story, right? What, like I would look at somebody, what's your backstory? Like, where were you born? Where did you go to school? All these crazy things when you're sitting in traffic and thinking about things like that. And that everybody has a backstory in life, and everybody's headed someplace in life. And so when you start looking at a Malik Benson and his background, this is a player, when you talk about the eligibility, he had to kind of fight. Well, he fell into that category of because he had started his college career at Hutchinson Community College. So he had 2 years at junior college, then went to Alabama, 1 year at Alabama under Nick Saban. Nick Saban, retires, and they bring in a new coaching staff, and it's time for Malik Benson to move on. I guess he just didn't fit in what Alabama was doing. He went to Florida State, year 4. Didn't really work out at Florida State. It was kind of a bad season, and now he's looking for another place maybe to transfer to. But his eligibility is in question because he had played those 2 years at junior college. Well, lo and behold, at that very time is when I guess somebody fought this, and the eligibility for junior college players that played 2 years in junior college, and there was an opportunity for him to continue to play one more year. That's when he went to Oregon, and that's where he played last year, and had a breakthrough season for him. He had previously 2023, 13 catches, 162 yards at Alabama. 2024, 25 catches at Florida State for 311 yards. That was his 4th year of college eligibility. So technically, he was out. He didn't have any more eligibility, but because of this ruling with the junior colleges, he was able to get one more year in 2025, and that's when it jumped up to 43 catches for 719 yards. Obviously, a light went on. Obviously, he was in the right situation. Obviously, things came together for him. So when you look at a Malik Benson, He's coming off his best college football season at the Division I level. Things seemed to come together for him. It didn't make him a high draft pick, but it put him on the NFL radar. This is a guy that wasn't on the NFL radar just 1 year ago when he was deciding where am I going to go play after leaving Florida State. I say all that to say this is a guy that feels like his best football is ahead of him. He's just scratching the surface. He just kind of got started at Oregon last year, and I think that bodes well for him coming to a Raiders team that needs help at wide receiver, has a lot of opportunities for young wide receivers, and has a real need for the kind of size and speed that he brings to the table.
Yeah, there's speed there, no doubt about it. I mean, we're talking about a high school track athlete that was, well regarded in both the 200 and 100 meters. So he's more than just a track athlete playing football, though, because when you take a look at the highlights of Malik Benson, he's somebody that uses his speed to go deep, tear the top off the defense, but more importantly, what we saw at Oregon was he was somebody that was a major threat on short passes, an open field runner that can break tackles and is very slippery. And he seems like a guy that if you're able to get him the ball past the linebackers, like he's going to be very difficult to stop. Or just being somebody that could be able to go and put on some double moves and find a length of confidence in the route running ability of what Kubiak really loves. He loves to see those route runners. Maybe Malik Benson might be that guy, the key to what the Raiders have been trying to look for out of their wide receiver group, guys who are explosive and that can use their size with all the good balance that they normally have seen in college. But that work that he did in Oregon is extremely helpful to find out, all right, what kind of guy is this? Because where is he going? Where, like, as you said, as you're watching somebody, where are they going and what is their story? Malik Benson is somebody that it still looks like he is not that complete finished product, and his story is still being written.
Yeah, without a doubt, and he's got the requisite size. I think he put good film out there last year. He's got the requisite speed. I think he fits in this type of a system, and we're not saying that he's going to go win a starting job. By not saying that at all, but he's definitely somebody that is going to be able to push a Dante Thornton. He's going to be able to push a Jack Besh at the very least. Mm-hmm. And so when you're thinking about, and you start looking at the fact that Trey Tucker is going into the last year of his contract. What does his future hold here for the Raiders? So there might be a bigger opportunity next year if he can find his footing as a rookie. So Malik Benson is somebody that I believe, with the clean slate that everybody's getting, with the new coaching staff and opportunities across the board in terms of the position groups, but specifically at wide receiver where the Raiders need to find some production. I think that for sure Malik Benson is somebody to keep an eye on. My other sleeper, quote unquote, and under the radar player is Dalton Johnson, the safety from Arizona, out of Arizona. Another player that played a good amount of football in college, played at a high level in college. Played on in a secondary at Arizona, that produced, what was it, 4 NFL players? I think four of the Arizona defensive backs got drafted, including 2 by the Raiders, and including Treydon Stukes. Dalton Johnson, with the way the safety room is constructed and what they're looking for in terms of playmakers, what they're looking for in terms of chess pieces, I think Dalton Johnson is somebody to keep an eye on as well.
I think that's a very good assessment, because we see what Dalton Johnson's been able to do in the breadth of his career in college. But what we see, though, is like beyond the 97 tackles and 4 interceptions, this guy was also a first-team All-Big 12 selection out of Arizona, joining Stukes. But what we saw most importantly was that he was versatile. He can play nickel. He's shown you he can play strong safety, free safety. This is a very skilled player, especially when you could go and find him late in those rounds in the trade with Tyree Wilson. This was a guy that it seems like, not unlike, as you said, like Malik Benson, in a position group that is still trying to find itself with the Raiders at wide receiver. Well, so is the safety position for the Raiders, and it makes you wonder like what his role could be and where he could find time. And maybe it's a collection of time finding the spot at nickel, strong safety, and free safety. Dalton Johnson could really find a way to win time.
49 games at Arizona, stayed his entire career at Arizona, including 4 years as the starter, 152 tackles total, 13 tackles for losses, 3 sacks, 5 interceptions. This guy is a guy that played a lot of football and played productive football. It would not shock me whatsoever if he found a role on the Raiders, and whether it's special teams early on or down the road as a potential starter or rotational player. It's the morning tailgate on Raider Nation Radio, 9:20 a.m. Vinny, Clay, and Connor. We want your thoughts. 702-365-9200. We're putting out our sleepers, our under the radar players that we're keeping an eye on. Who do you have an eye on as the Raiders head to training camp?
This is the morning tailgate.
Deuce! Goodbye! Into the end zone! 60 yards! Touchdown Raiders!
With Vince Sapienza, Vinny Bonsignore, and Clay Baker.
It's a trifecta for Bowers! His third touchdown of the game! And the Raiders with a chance to win it!
On Raider Nation Radio, 920.
Welcome back to the morning tailgate show on Raider Nation Radio, 9:20 a.m. Vinny, Clay, and Connor. We're talking sleepers. We're talking under the radar Raiders. Look, we've talked so much about Fernando Mendoza, Brock Bowers, Ashton Denty, Jackson Powers Johnson, Maxx Crosby. All of those guys are extremely important to what the Raiders are going to do, without question. But you need help across the board, and you need help in ways that maybe you didn't necessarily anticipate. And those are sometimes the best stories of all. The guys that, quote unquote, came out of nowhere to make their mark. And you're like, who the heck is that guy? I talk about Isaiah Polamalu all the time, and Nate Hobbs. The first time I saw Nate Hobbs, I could literally visualize exactly where I was. It was over at the facility in Henderson. It was when John Gruden was still the head coach, and the players start walking on the field for an OTA practice. It might have been the first OTA practice that they had, and I see this guy that just looked different, carried himself differently, had a swagger about him, had a demeanor about him, and then when he went out there and played, I felt like he had an advanced, feeling for playing football, and I was like, who the heck is that guy? Oh, that's that Nate Hobbs guy from Illinois. And if you remember, Nate made a terrific play. I want to say it was at SoFi Stadium in a preseason game against the Rams, where he's covering his guy and instinctively saw where the quarterback was going to go with the ball, and kind of broke some rules by peeling off of his guy because he felt like the ball's going to go there. I need to go chase it down, and did exactly that, and came up with the interception. Now, technically, he probably made a couple of mistakes or two leaving his guy, but he understood his instincts were so good that he was like, the ball's not coming over here, it's over there. I need to sprint over there, and he did to put himself in position. And obviously got congratulated, came up with the interception, but it was a sign of, okay, this guy looks pretty good. And Nate Hobbs, from his rookie season on, played a nice role for the Raiders. Unfortunately for him, he couldn't stay healthy. But those are the type of players that we're talking about. Nate Hobbs was not very heralded. Yeah. A fifth-round pick, somebody that you weren't necessarily focused on from the draft class, but made himself a focal point, made himself known, made his presence felt from day one. And that's the type of guys that we're talking about. The guys that just sort of come out of nowhere. The players that I've listed so far are Kion Sloan, the undrafted free agent from North Carolina State, kind of a pass rusher, edge rusher, could also drop back and cover. Zeke Massis, the fifth-round cornerback from Cal. Malik Benson, we talked about Malik. Sixth-round pick, wide receiver from Oregon. Dalton Johnson. I'm really intrigued by Dalton Johnson. We talk a lot about Treydon Stukes. I'd be shocked if Treydon Stukes doesn't earn a starting role right off the bat. I think he's wired that way. I think the Raiders have a plan in place for him, and I think he's going to seize it, and I think he's going to be a memorable player for the Raiders. But I'm not putting anything, Clay, past Dalton Johnson. When you look at the productivity that he had, and the fact that he stayed at Arizona, I don't know what that tells me necessarily, but he stayed 5 years at the University of Arizona and got better every single year. And when he was on the football field, he started from year 3 on. This was a productive player in a lot of different ways, whether it was pass coverage, college, run support. He rushed the passer. He made plays behind the line of scrimmage. This is what you're looking at and looking for when you're talking about having players in your secondary that you can move around the field.
Yeah, you don't normally find guys like that that late in the draft because he obviously showed you that, like you said, rushing the passer, tackles for losses, 4 interceptions his last year. Like this is a valuable player when you start looking at how he's honed his skills, and when he comes to the Raiders, it makes me wonder, like, because of his versatility, I wonder how much of a hybrid safety he could be, because sometimes we see how certain aspects of guys that Rob Leonard has worked with before, for example, Brian Flores. Brian Flores could take a guy like Dalton Johnson and move him around the field, where you almost might see him take some snaps, or at least have the kind of ability where he's kind of lining up at linebacker. There's many different ways and roles that Dalton Johnson could stay on the field, and I think that bodes well, because you see even how somebody, even as a free safety, Polamalu is going to be, he's on his final year, and like, how much is he going to be challenged by the influx of this new young talent? And Dalton Johnson could be there as a guy that can kind of stay on the field a little bit longer and has more variable assets than somebody like Isaiah.
277 tackles since 20. That's when you count the assists and and also the solo tackles. Why did he last as long as he did? Well, in terms of measurables and physicality, he's not the biggest, he's not the fastest, he doesn't weigh the most. But what I love about Dalton, and what I think about what I think about reasons why he's going to get on the field, was in spite of that, in spite of some of the lack of measurables, and this is a measurable league. You draft a lot of times not just on what the player did in college, what you feel the potential is for the player to do in the NFL, but also measurable size, speed, all of those types of things play into it, and you're going to get graded in terms of what round the NFL sees you in, whether you're even a draftable player or an undrafted player, free agent. A lot of those, where you end up getting drafted, a lot of that has more to do with your measurables than the actual production. So this is a player in college who lacked some of the ideal measurables, but in terms of the production was as productive as any player in college. And it doesn't have to be his rookie year where he has to hit. This is a player that I would keep my eye on for the future. But when I look at those tackles, that tells me instincts, it tells me physical toughness, it tells me want to. So I think the starting point for Dalton Johnson, this is an extremely important starting point, is special teams. He kind of reminds me, just in terms of the special teams and getting on the field, and then building off of that in terms of some sort of a package. And when you do mention Robbie Leonard, I think that's, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. That's the most curious thing that I have about the defense in terms of the coaching, is that we don't know. Yes, he learned under Patrick Graham. He learned under Brian Flores, and has a lot of experience as an assistant coach. But most of those years that he was along the defensive line. Now he's running the entire show, and I'm very curious, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Clay, on what that's going to look like for Robbie Leonard. Now calling all the shots, now scheming it up, now putting it into, taking it from the playbook onto the field and figuring out what he has in all of these various players. And when I look at this roster, especially when you're looking at linebacker and the secondary, I see players that profile as chess pieces and playmakers, and I'm really curious and want to get your thoughts on how you think Robbie Leonard transitions to calling the shots and how he starts tapping into all these playmakers that the Raiders have put together.
I think because of his time spent as the defensive line coach for the Raiders, his familiarity with what is up front on that defensive line is very good. And it shows you that he's going to try to be as aggressive as possible. And as we talk to people down in the past couple of weeks and months, we talk about a higher blitz rate out of that defensive line. Well, the outcome of that can be opportunities for a secondary that could be ball hawking in nature. And the way they went about the draft to go and find guys that are very good at getting to the ball, from Stukes to Masses, Dalton Johnson, Jermod McCoy, it just kind of lets me further know of how aggressive they want to be, because they want to start being opportunistic. And if Rob Leonard wants to make an imprint on his first year, I think that's very good. You're kind of lucky in the fact that he has such a good familiarity and knowledge of what he has up front. That way way you don't have to wait for certain guys to show up, because you may not know what kind of assets you have as a new defensive coordinator. The familiarity that Rob Leonard already has with this kind of grouping really bodes well. And I would like to see not only a higher blitz rate, but maybe just more aggressive corners where you're not too far off the ball, where you got corners starting to maybe play man more often, or at least showing that they're going to play man and trying to confuse defenses. Last year, we didn't see a lot of that overall. The defense wasn't fooling anybody.
Going back to Dalton Johnson, the height, weight, length are quite honestly below NFL, what their standards, what they're looking for, but that's okay. That's just kind of a reference point, and that's why he was drafted where he was drafted. But he showed in college that his instincts and his play and his want to could overcome some of the physical shortcomings. Now the trick is for him, can that happen for him in the NFL, and that's all going to come down to productivity and his willingness, and I think the willingness is there. So we'll see now if that is able to continue to translate in spite of some of the lack of measurables. But there's a long history of players that defied all of those things and said, yeah, you might have drafted me in this round because I wasn't 6 foot whatever and weighed 200 and whatever, and didn't run a 40 and 4 point whatever you needed it to be. Once I get on the field, you're going to see that that is not a problem. My instincts will take care of all that. My next sleeper player that, and this is a veteran player who's got a lot of track record in the NFL, but I think for the Raider purposes, a signing that may have flown under the radar a little bit, and that's Benito Jones, the nose tackle, defensive tackle that has played a lot of football. It's not always been great football, but I think for the Raider purposes, moving to a 3-4 base defense, where I'm very curious how much they're actually going to play, out of that formation. But is Benito Jones somebody that's going to be able to hold down the fort? Not as a play in and play out player, but somebody when they are in certain looks is going to be on the field because he fits that profile and fits that need. And how long can he stay on the field by proving that he's going to be a worthy component of the defense?
The size really kind of stands out for Benito Jones, 6'1", 335, as opposed to somebody that might be ahead of him on the depth chart, like an Adam Butler, who is strong but not as big, doesn't have that kind of girth package. I'd like to see the fact that Benito Jones, he seems like one of those guys that has been purposely picked out as far as as a free agent, not unlike how Kieran Crawford was drafted a little higher than most people thought for the Raiders, because it feels like there's a plan in place for them, for both Benito and for somebody like Kieran Crawford. Different plans individually, but one in which they are taking a Rob Leonard, and the defense will have a guy that can go and provide mismatches. And Benito Jones, is he going to be asked to be that pass rusher? I don't know, but definitely somebody, that guy that can glut up the middle and at least provide some sort of run protection, somebody that can start stopping the run, and it can be difficult to move, because last year we saw there were times where it was difficult for the defensive line to dictate the game. They were often getting moved around quite often by offenses that, quite honestly, I didn't think that were that strong, but they were just getting moved around enough to where they were able to manipulate the run. Maybe Benito Jones is the guy that is that X factor that stops that.
Yeah, it has been primarily a B-gap player of his career snaps. 1,289 have come as a B-gap player, far more than any position that he's played. He's played a career 1,664 snaps, but primarily in the B-gap. He's not going to give you much in terms of the he'll flash a little bit in the pass rush, but he's a guy that when you think about the Raiders' run defense, hasn't always been that good. Last year was definitely not a strength of the team. Can he assist in those early downs as a run stopper, somebody that could occupy blockers in order for guys like Nakobe Dean and Quay Walker and some of these other players to be able to come in and clean it up and make stops. A guy like Benito Jones, you don't necessarily always look at the production in terms of the tackles.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's guys that are they're just they're unselfish, and their game isn't necessarily to make tackles; it's to occupy blockers so that your linebackers can come in and clean up. We are going to go to the Raider Nation Radio listener line because Charles from Oregon wants to chime in on who his sleepers and under the radar players are. Charles, take it away, brother.
Hey, good morning. So I just thought it was funny, Vinny, that as I was listening to you guys, I was at the gym doing my cardio, and I was like, well, I'll call him when I'm, before breakfast. And as I was going over the people, I was thinking, oh, Sion Sloan. And you brought him up. And then Dalton Johnson, Malik Benson. So these are all the guys that I was thinking that are kind of under the radar. But to me, the guy, and you mentioned him, I appreciate you guys mentioning him, because I feel like you never hear his name. It feels weird to me that the third-round pick in Kieran Crawford, it just feels like there's not a whole lot of talk about him. Mm-hmm. And I know that there's a logjam at defensive end, but I kind of still feel like that I foresee that he's going to produce. I know he got a late start playing football in his life, but I think Kieran Crawford is going to be a huge bright spot. He played opposite Kedrick Falk, who I think went in the first round. But a lot of scouts said, man, you got to look at this guy, Kieran Crawford. So looking forward to him. And then the other thing I'm realizing is I really think that Coach Kubiak has said, what he says is what he does. And the guy's name that keeps coming up is Dylan Lobby. I know people are talking about the other running back.
Washington.
What's his name? Washington, thank you.
Yeah.
It was picked up. But there's been a lot of talk about Dylan Lobby being solid. And then I'm going to pound the table again for Caleb Rogers. There's so much talk about JPJ because people like the initials, but Caleb Rogers, I think, is going to be one of the best offensive linemen for the Raiders this year. He's been putting in work, just like Malik Benson's been putting in work and asking a lot of questions of Fernando. So those are some of the guys I was thinking of. All right.
Great job,
appreciate
Charles.
you guys taking the call.
Great.
Thanks.
Way to go. Those are great under-the-radar players.
Yeah, Caleb Rogers, I think he has an opportunity to earn a starting role this year. I think Trey Zune, also a third-round pick from Texas A&M, also has a chance to win a job. Spencer Burford, I think, right now has a pretty nice lock on the left guard position, and that makes a lot of sense. There's a familiarity with what the Raiders are doing offensively. Klint Kubiak was a coach of his a few years ago with the 49ers. So I think that he's a real good fit for what the Raiders are going to try to do schematically along the offensive line. But he's only on a one-year deal. We'll see where that takes him. It could be just a stopgap type of a situation with Caleb Rogers and Trey Zune being the future of those two positions. And what does that mean for Jackson Powers-Johnson? I'm very interested, and he's obviously not a player that is flying under the radar by any stretch of the imagination. But I think it is time for Jackson Powers-Johnson to step up, to claim a job, to be consistent, to be more of a guy that you could rely on, to be an actual player. He's a theoretical player right now for me, Clay. Theoretically, you look at the size, you look at the demeanor, you look at all of those things, you look at his track record in college. Theoretically, he should be a day one starter, and he should be a focal point along the offensive line, and he should be somebody that Raider Nation embraces, the coaches embraces, his teammates embrace. But that's all theoretical because it just has not happened yet on the field. Some of it is out of his control. He's gotten hurt. Other parts of it is in his control in terms of the consistency that the Raiders are looking for and playing smart football rather than sometimes reckless football. They need him to hone that in. But first and foremost, for Jackson Powers-Johnson, he needs to be able to stay on the field. And I'm talking about during practice, during training camp, during the preseason, during the regular season. He needs to put together a body of work. And if not, there's other players that are getting ready to assume that role or to take that role or to move him aside and nudge him aside. And so So for him, this is a pivotal year for Jackson Powers Johnson going into year 3 with the Raiders.
Well, it truly is. You never want to have the organization think about other guys, especially when you're taken as a second-round pick. Jackson Powers Johnson was supposed to be a no-doubter, a guy that was supposed to be a starter, somebody you could rely on, and then you could start building pieces. He could be a piece that you could help build around with. And it's funny how my list of like 5 under-the-radar players, I got more under-the-radar players, but there's 3 taken from the second round, Besh, Mayer, and JPJ. Theoretically, you're right. We should be expecting more from that, but we still haven't seen it, and the availability or unavailability from JPJ has really cost him. It makes me wonder now, this time around, like how solidified is he in the concepts of what they're looking for, what Rick Dennison is looking for, because they're not going to wait too long to find the right mix for that up front. And Dennison is somebody that is got some other talented guys in this mix, and he brought up Trey Zune. You can't underestimate the fact that they went out and got him, and this is somebody that can play guard, has played left tackle, center. He may not have the length, but he's got the high floor, and at Texas A&M, he was one of the most pro-ready interior offensive linemen that was available in the draft. So there's actual real competition for JPJ, and Caleb Rogers is somebody that is seemingly doing all the right things, especially with what we hear from him and how the other coaches have talked about his growth. That I wonder how long JPJ will solidify his role there and just leave no room for doubt, because there's a lot of hungry guys that are coming in there that it makes me feel like the coaching staff, especially the GM, is taking a look at.
Well, a couple of reminders. 8:30 a.m. Myles Simmons from Pro Football Talk will be joining us, and then 9 a.m. Marcus Johnson from Tape Don't Lie will be joining us. I could say this: time is running out. I'm being straight up. Time is running out. That doesn't mean that time has run out with Jackson Powers Johnson, but there's a bright light on him, and I'm not saying that it's now or never, but it's getting to that stage where, dude, it's time to show up. It's time to be available. It's time to play. It's time to be out there, and it's time to justify that second round pick that the Raiders invested in you. And when you look at somebody like a Rick Dennison and a Klint Kubiak, they want consistency. They want to be able to. They want reliability. They want somebody that knows what he's supposed to be doing and can work cohesively with the rest of the unit. So Jackson Powers Johnson is certainly not under the radar. In fact, he's majorly on the radar. And on a lot of people's minds, and it's time for him to turn theory and theoreticalness into reality. It's the Morning Tailgate with Vinny Bonsignor and Clay Baker.
Vince, Vinny, and Clay want to hear from you. Call or text the show at 702-365-9200. Now, back to the Morning Tailgate.
It is the Morning Tailgate on Raider Nation Radio, 9:20 a.m. And without further ado, we're going to go out to the Raider Nation Radio guest line, because our good friend Myles Simmons, former Las Vegian. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I probably am not, but that's what I'm going to go with. Las Vegian Myles Simmons, who's now in the beautiful state of California, in the lap of luxury, doing great things for Pro Football Talk. And Myles, first of all, appreciate you joining us this morning. You know, it's interesting from a national perspective. Anytime you have a first pick overall that's a quarterback in the NFL, there's going to be a big spotlight. So all the national outlets are going to be they're going to have their eye on what's going on with the Raiders in Henderson when training camp gets started, with Fernando Mendoza and Kirk Cousins, being the guy that might hold down the fort a little bit. But what would you say the level of curiosity for Fernando and the Raiders is or are as we get set for training camp?
Lap of luxury. All right, let's slow it down there a little bit, okay? Now, when it comes to the Raiders, though, I think that there is a high level of curiosity. I do, in large part because you have also a new head coach in Kubiak. And, we all saw what he was able to do with that offense in Seattle last year, getting Sam Darnold to play as well as he did in order to win the Super Bowl, right? And so that, I think, also adds to just the intrigue of the entire situation. But I think at this point, it seems like the Raiders have at least signaled throughout the course of the offseason that they don't want Fernando Mendoza to start on day one unless he kind of goes out there and sets the world on fire. But, I mean, they've set it up, I think, in a good way with a guy like Kirk Cousins, who is there, who is the veteran presence, who has so many years of experience in the National Football League and a lot of experience being successful in that kind of system that Kubiak is going to implement there. So I do think that there's a high level of intrigue, but with the understanding that, hey, we may not see Fernando Mendoza until maybe mid-season unless, things don't go so well with Kirk Cousins,
Does it mean, based on Kirk Cousins' performance, that Mendoza starts, or are there certain factors that you feel that need to be in place before he gives that job as ascended number one QB?
Well, the thing that the Raiders have signaled is that there are things that need to be in place. But I think, when you go out and you get the veteran center in free agency, I think that's one thing that helps, right? You have a guy like a Brock Bowers who we know can be extraordinarily effective as a tight end when he's healthy. You have a guy like Ashton Jeanty who we all feel can be a really good back if things are set up for him. So, I mean, it could be the first quarter of the season, which I know is no longer really a thing because of math and 17 games, but go with me. If you get through the first 4 games, right, and Kirk Cousins is doing fine but not great, then that also might be a point where you say to yourself, all right, well, is this the time where Mendoza is ready? But I think that there's so much that goes into it that we aren't able to see on that day-to-day basis, right? Like, what is Mendoza like in the classroom where he really is putting things up on the board where he understands, or he's answering questions where he understands, or he starts going from asking the basic questions to the more advanced questions. All of these things can be signals that somebody is ready to go from, okay, he's on the bench because we don't want to overwhelm him, to, yeah, he is now in the position that we want him to be in where he can start and be effective.
We're talking to Myles Simmons from Pro Football Talk. All right, what I'm about to describe would be considered a good problem to have, but a problem nonetheless. And I want to back it up, to, 2024. The Vikings draft J.J. McCarthy. I'm not trying to compare J.J. to Fernando Mendoza. To me, they're two different levels of quarterback, but the concept still remains. You draft a quarterback high in the first round, but you also sign a veteran. In the Vikings case, it was Sam Darnold. In the Raiders case, it's Kirk Cousins. Circumstance dictated that J.J. McCarthy gets hurt, ironically, against the Raiders in the preseason opener, and now Sam Darnold has to be the quarterback for the full year. Lo and behold, they have a great season, right? And so then there's a hard decision to make at the end of the year, and we'll get into that in 1 second. Is there a world where, because you just mentioned, some of the weapons that the Raiders have, and theoretically a highly improved coaching staff as well to kind of put that all together, is there a potential problem that could exist where Kirk Cousins and the Raiders are playing just too good to ever get Fernando on the field? And now at the end of the year, you had a pretty good season with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback, but you've got nothing for Fernando Mendoza in terms of the learning curve. And why I bring that up is because obviously the Vikings get rid of Sam Darnold or let him leave in free agency, and now you're starting really from square one with J.J. McCarthy, and there was a massive learning curve for J.J. McCarthy, and it was a major struggle for him and for the Vikings when ideally he would have probably stayed healthy and played that rookie season, and whatever happened in terms of the record. But the Vikings and J.J. McCarthy would have been better off going into year 2. You understand where I'm going with that, where now it's 2027 and there's been no practical playing time for Fernando Mendoza, and you might be starting at square one when you could get that taken care of in year 1.
I do see what you're saying, Vinny, and it's interesting because I would go back to 2017, with that sort of comparison. And again, not trying to compare two different people, right? But more or less just the situation. But with the Chiefs and Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes, right? And I kind of feel like that's a little bit more comparable because, you have a quarterback who's familiar with the system and is more of a veteran and has had more success, is more on the back nine of the career than the Vikings and Sam Darnold and McCarthy and all that. Because Darnold was still more of an unknown entity.
Complete.
I feel like going into that 24 season with the Vikings. And God love him. I never would have expected Sam Darnold to have the last couple of years that he's had based on the first several seasons of his career. So I do feel like the Raiders would be more in that situation of the 2017-2018 Chiefs if it so happens that Kirk Cousins sets the world on fire and, gets them into a position where they're being really competitive and potentially in the postseason race where, you want Mendoza to keep learning. You want Mendoza to get out there. But, if he's playing that well, then why would you do that? And I just feel like Mendoza's going to be in a better situation going into 27, irrespective of whether he plays or not. Now, in my heart of hearts, do I really see something like that happening? No, I think that Mendoza will probably get on the field at some point, whether it's early on in the season, like week 4 or whatnot, to, mid-season, week 8, week 9. I think that we will see Mendoza on the field at some point in his rookie year. But is there a scenario that exists where Mendoza doesn't see the field as a rookie and then would ascend to QB1 in 2027? Yes, I do think that that's a possibility out there.
Well, then let's take a look at what stands in his way, preferably, is Kirk Cousins. Myles, what did you make of Kirk Cousins' time in Atlanta, what we last saw of him, and how this translates now into, another year of what he's working with in a West Coast offense? Can he take on the rigors of a full season the way we saw it work out in Atlanta? Do you feel like this is a bump up for him, or this is another year of transition for somebody like Cousins?
I think it is kind of a year of transition, but I also think that let me put it this way, the further he gets away from the Achilles injury he had in 23, the better off he's going to be. I thought that he just didn't really look healthy for a lot of 24. Yeah. And I mean, it became a real issue where he was just not the quarterback that we were used to seeing. I mean, the velocity wasn't on the ball. He wasn't also making the best decisions. He couldn't move around particularly well. But I thought late last year when we saw more of him, he looked like more of the Kirk Cousins that I think we all kind of got accustomed to seeing when he was with Minnesota. So I think the fact that he is healthy, the fact that he's another year removed from the Achilles injury definitely does help him going into 2026. It's going to be interesting because, look, at the end of the day, it still is a new team, new coach, new personnel that he's all working with. But I think that the professionalism that you're going to get with a Kirk Cousins is such that he's likely going to be a competent quarterback. I don't know how much he's got left in the tank to say, oh, yeah, he's going to be particularly good. But I think that he can go out there, be a professional, and at least operate an offense for you.
We're talking to Myles Simmons from Pro Football Talk. Switching over to the defensive side of the football, obviously Maxx Crosby is the leader of the Raiders defense, and there was a kind of a tricky offseason for Maxx Crosby. Initially, he wanted to be traded in ways that athletes sometimes get the word out. That was made pretty clear that he wanted out. The Raiders accommodated him, traded him to the Baltimore Ravens for a couple of first-round picks. He gets to Baltimore. That falls through because of concerns about the knee. Now he's back with the Raiders. Do you think that that's a marriage that will, merrily and happily move down the road? Or would you be surprised if Maxx Crosby at some point this year gets traded once teams get a look at the knee and see that, he's back to being Maxx Crosby? Maybe it's time for us to give the Raiders a call.
Yeah, I would not be surprised if he ends up getting moved mid-season, to a contender who says, okay, Maxx Crosby is still Maxx Crosby, and we feel good about his production, And the whole situation with the Ravens is very interesting to me because sometimes their processes are a little bit different than the processes of other teams. That doesn't make it wrong because obviously there's so many different ways to win in the NFL. But whenever you're trading for somebody, and it's not like we didn't know that Maxx Crosby had a knee issue. I mean, it became a significant issue down the stretch of last season, so when he wanted to play and the team was like, So it's not like this is something that, just came up, but the way the Ravens went through it and the way they ended up making those decisions then put Maxx Crosby back with the Raiders. And I give Crosby credit for just the way he's kind of handled things since the end of that trade, because there could have been a lot more ugliness, I feel like, between the two sides and some public animosity. But, look, he's back with the Raiders and he says he's all in, and we'll see how it goes. But, yeah, I don't think that just because Crosby is with the Raiders now doesn't mean that there's no possibility that somebody could get involved with a potential trade midseason.
Hey, lastly, Myles, just real quick, what did you make of some of the sights and visions of seeing somebody like Aaron Donald at the Rams facility earlier this week?
Oh, baby. I mean, it's funny because there are some folks that I still know. I'm connected to the Rams organization, having worked there for a number of years. I sent a couple texts, when the Myles Garrett trade happens. And it's like, oh, do you think this could bring Aaron Donald out of retirement? And they're like, it's the non-zero chance, and that non-zero number seems to be continuing to be growing. And so I think that there is certainly a good chance that Aaron Donald could come out of retirement at this point. It seems like that's the way that the wind is blowing. I don't know how effective he's going to be, and it almost feels sacrilegious for me to say that sentence out loud, because I have total faith and confidence, and having watched Aaron Donald for every day for 5 years, this is a guy that's not going to get back on the field unless he feels like he can truly be himself and play at the level that he's accustomed to playing. And I also think that he could do that because this is a guy that, benches dumbbells that are 150 pounds each. I can't even fathom picking that up. And he does it with one arm and then benches it. So, I think that this is somebody who could come back and still be effective. And honestly, I would love to see it, right? I mean, just from a historical perspective, as a fan of football, seeing Myles Garrett and Aaron Donald play together just sounds super cool to me. So I hope it happens. I don't know if it'll happen or not, but I really hope it does.
All right. Well, they keep watching what Myles is doing over at ProFootballTalk.com, as well as he does a great job hosting PFT Live at Myles A. Simmons on X. Myles, thank you so much for making time with us this morning. Let's do it again soon. Have a great day.
Of course, guys. Take care.
Thank you. That's Myles Simmons here with us on Raider Nation Radio, the morning tailgate. Oh, it's Christmas in July. We're giving away prizes each and every hour here on our 920. We gave you the word of the day. It is cabin, C-A-B-I-N. But Santa Connor has more in store for you as we open up the prize shelf and find out the great goodies for you on Raider Nation Radio.
Yeah, we got some fun stuff going on here in the next couple weeks. One of the big things going on is the Totally Tubular Festival going down at the Sahara. It's going to be at the pool going on at the Las Vegas Sahara Hotel on July 25th. Right now, you have your chance to win a pair of tickets to the Totally Tubular Festival. If you want to go get some of that sun fun action, it's not too hot right now with the cloud cover. Hopefully, it lasts a little bit longer. So if you can get in there, if you want to get in there, I'm giving away a pair of tickets right now. Caller number 9 to 702-365-9200. Again, I'm going to take caller number 9 at 702-365-9200.
We'll take your comments and questions on X. Follow us at RNR920AM. Let's dig into the morning tailgate on Raider Nation Radio 920.
Welcome back to the morning tailgate on Raider Nation Radio 920 AM. Vinny, Clay, and Connor. Our thanks again to Myles Simmons, our good friend. And I had to add it, and we ran out of time. I couldn't bring this up with Myles, but Myles and I both know Erica Donald. That is the wife of Aaron Donald. And I still think that Erica is going to have something to say about all this and Aaron Donald coming back to the Rams. But I just have this feeling at the end of the day, she's going to sign off on this. And Aaron Donald's going to be back. And I know from the Rams' perspective, they don't expect him to come back and be, the 89, 90% player that he was, the last time when he was a Ram player in terms of the snap count. He's not going to be a guy that plays 85 to 90% of the snaps anymore. So they're going to probably try to take if he does come back, take those snaps down from 60, 65 snaps per game down to 25 to 30 snaps per game. And be able to take advantage of it that way. Get the max that they can get from him in a smaller sample size, but in that smaller sample size, get the maximum Aaron Donald that they possibly can get in that kind of a role.
Can you go wrong with that? Having a fresh Aaron Donald on rotation to do 30 snaps a game like that, you're going to get impact. You're going to get mismatch problems. That's going to be something that'll constantly be on somebody's mind and several people's minds on the other sideline, trying to figure out, all right, now how do we stop this guy? Because I still feel like he has plenty in the tank to go and do great work with a limited snap count, especially with the other guys that are already there. It's not like he's coming into a team that doesn't have other role players that can go and free him up to go just do major damage.
It's a loaded defensive line, and it got even more loaded, obviously, with Myles Garrett. There's definitely capable players that he's going to be able to rotate in and around. Here's the thing about Aaron Donald, and I was talking to somebody with the Rams about this. The thing about Aaron Donald is he's much like Maxx Crosby, and I've told Maxx Crosby this. I go, there's only one other guy that I've ever seen that ruins practices the way you do, and his name was Aaron Donald. I used to see this day in and day out in training camp where Aaron Donald was just destroying your offense, to the point where Sean McVay and Jared Goff, you get a little frustrated because you're trying to get your offense in, but there's no way of dealing with number 99, and he's just wrecking everything that you do, and we've seen that so many times with Maxx Crosby. And here's the thing, for Maxx Crosby and for Aaron Donald to get to that point, to get to that level, to be able to play at their max level, it's not something that happens just by showing up at training camp or showing up, when you're obligated to during the OTAs and involuntary this, involuntary that. No, it's a 24/7, 365 day out of the year proposition, and they don't settle for anything less, not from others, but from themselves. They have a standard for themselves, and they put that necessary work in to get that maximum level of themselves, and they don't settle for anything less. And so that's the key for Aaron Donald is, I know what I have to do and what's necessary and what's required to be Aaron Donald. The Aaron Donald that I will never deviate from, that I will never allow myself to deviate from. I know what kind of work that takes to get that version of Aaron Donald. Do I really want to go down that path again? Because that is a very challenging thing. When you're in the moment, you're in the moment, and that's what you got to do, and that's what you have to do, and you're not going to settle for anything less than that. Maxx Crosby does the same exact thing. It's why he's at the facility at 4:00 in the morning, beating everybody there, sure. To start getting his workout in. When you're in that routine, I'm not saying it's easy because it's the hardest thing in the world, but it's a little bit easier because your body you're programmed at that point. You take a step away for a couple of years, as Aaron Donald did, and that becomes really daunting. Like, do I want to go back down that path again? That frenetic, crazy, relentless, kind of psychotic way that I have to be mentally in order to get the most out of me, because I'm not going to settle for anything less. That's the challenge for him. But I think what the Rams are probably going to are selling to him is that we don't need you necessarily to be that Aaron Donald, and so give yourself a little bit of a break here in terms of that, and Aaron Donald's going to work as hard as he's going to work to get whatever he's going to get out of himself. But that understanding of it's not 90% snap Aaron Donald that we're looking for or need necessarily, but there is a role out there for you, and if you can get yourself mentally right to be able to put the work in and commit yourself to that level to get that version of Aaron Donald, then we're good with that. And so, but that's one thing for the team to understand, that guys like Aaron Donald, Clay, and Maxx Crosby are wired so differently. It's like unfathomable to them wait a minute, less than who I was, less than I don't, that doesn't even compute with me. So for them, for players like that, that's a little bit of a mind trick to trick yourself into, I don't have to be that version of myself. I could be a little bit lesser version of himself, but that's contradictory to everything that they've ever stood for.
Yeah, I can't think of too many players that have ever taken that amount of time off to go and then put together a full season. Richie Incognito kind of comes to mind, where he took a good amount of time off then to become a solidified starter, taking 90% of the reps. And Aaron Donald's not going to be asked to do that at a high level, and that might be the best thing for him, especially when you think about what could be had and being able to play all season.
Yeah, and nothing against at all Richie, but this would be the equivalent of asking Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan to come out of retirement after a long time off.
Oh yes,
and understand that.
Right.
Yeah, we're talking about the 1% of the 1% and settling for a little bit less. Michael Jordan did that to some extent. Although if you go look at his statistics at Washington, they weren't that bad, actually. He was still playing pretty high level. It just wasn't the Michael Jordan level that we saw, and he was on a bad team. Aaron Donald could be less than what he was on an even better team than the one he left. So crazy things could happen. It's the Morning Tailgate. It's Vinny Bonsignor, Raider Nation Radio, 9:20 a.m. with Connor and Clay.
This is the Morning Tailgate.
There have been plenty of other coaches, but why not us? Why not this staff? Why not this group of players? I look at it as what a great challenge. We're going to be about the work.
He is back, baby! And the Raiders regain the lead!
With Vince Sapienza, Vinny Bonsignor, and Clay Baker on Raider Nation Radio 920.
Welcome back to the Morning Tailgate on Raider Nation Radio, 9:20 a.m. Vinny, Clay, and Connor. And we are going to go back out to the Raider Nation Radio guest line because our good friend Marcus Johnson from Tape Don't Lie is on. Marcus, we've been talking, first of all, thanks for joining us, as you always do. We truly appreciate it. We've been talking about sleepers and under the radar players for the Raiders who we have our eye on in training camp, guys that we've talked about a little bit here and bandied about, but now that the pads are getting ready to come on, there's a whole new horizon out there for some of these players and a whole new lens to look at them. And in one guy in particular that I'm really curious about watching, and I want your thoughts, and we're going to get into a few of these guys. But right off the top, Malik Benson, the wide receiver from Oregon, and he just feels like it came together for him last year at Oregon after some stops at Alabama and Florida State. Things started coming together for him last year. Is this a player who may have turned the corner last year and is just kind of scratching the surface on his football future?
Yeah, I believe so. I think Malik Benson has a skill set that really, kind of shows that he could at least become a number 2 in the NFL. I mean, it kind of be on him a little bit to become that number 1 guy, but he definitely has a skill set to be a solid a really good number 2 because, he's a good route runner, right? He definitely, he's great at catching the football. One thing that, a lot of people don't point out is that he only had 1 drop last season. He catches everything. He has great hands. He's strong hands too, can make catches through traffic. He can make catches, on the sideline, keep his balance and things like that, do little toe drags and things like that. So he has that ability too, where he could be a dependable pass catcher. And you can kind of mix it up with him too, where he has a future where he could become a little bit more of a possession receiver too, where he's just not that speed guy he's kind of getting labeled as. I think there's some potential there for that as well. And then you just add in the speed element too with him, and I think it's a guy that he kind of fits exactly what Kubiak likes, and maybe in the future you start to see him grow a little bit. Kubiak starts moving him around a little bit, and getting him better matchups, and because he's hard to guard in space one-on-one. Like maybe you could talk about a little bit about press coverage and things like that. Dealing with some of those issues where maybe people get some hands on him. He needs to be a little bit stronger in that aspect. But I think that what you see from him though is he's definitely somebody that if you can find ways to get him on certain players and certain safeties against certain coverages where he could just take the top off the defense. So I think that's where his future is, and just growing in what Kubiak really wants from his wide receivers. And I think that's somebody that I'm really looking out for in training camp and see, especially in the games too, to see how he stands out, because he's going to get a lot of playing time, especially to get a lot of playing time with Mendoza too, to see how that connection starts to grow as well. So that's what I'm really excited about.
You brought it up last week, which really settled in my mind of how difficult it will be for a lot of wide receivers to get targets, because this is going to be a 50-50 split of run and pass. So they're not going to be throwing the ball all over the field. So what can Malik Benson do to kind of separate himself? And you brought up the speed, being able to tear the top off the defense. But what about Malik Benson in the short range, when he's got open field on short passes? I was wondering if you would be able to maybe have like the pedigree necessary in comparison to somebody like Dante Thornton, that's a better route. Malik Benson's a better route runner than Dante, and maybe just based on his college experience, that he could probably start taking targets away from that big man.
Yeah, because, one thing that Benson has is he accelerates really fast in open field. He has his catch against Washington where it was kind of a dig route, and he ended up making a great catch. But then he landed, and as soon as his feet touched the ground, he was gone. And he split two defenders, and he was just, that acceleration he has.
It's awesome.
He has that yak ability in him.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it was awesome. You noted that on Tape Don't Lie. I saw that, and I think about that's something that you can see translate in the NFL.
Yeah, exactly. And he has that acceleration that is just, that just is top notch. And, especially in the West Coast offense where you can, find different ways to get guys in space, and you can do some of these choice routes and some of these shorter passes where it kind of depends a little bit on yak. You can really get it going with him, especially, you have Kirk Cousins in there, and Kirk Cousins and even Mendoza, they're going to be depending on a lot of yards after the catch. And I think Benson has that ability. Like, he doesn't have a lot of the wiggle where he's going to make people miss, and, you throw him a screen and things like that where he can make a lot of guys miss. But you can find ways to get him in space, and, if he beats a corner and he has a chance to kind of turn the corner, he can really get upfield super quickly, and I think that's something that I'm excited about, and see what he can grow and see how he fits in his offense. But I think the best way for him to get in the field is the return game. I think if he finds a way to become that kick returner and just get that excitement, that's going to build him getting on the field, and his special teams is how some of those six-round guys make it anyways.
Yeah, I agree with that. Another player that we've been talking about is Dalton Johnson, the safety from Arizona. And what are your thoughts about Dalton? A highly productive player for a long time at Arizona.
Yeah, Dalton Johnson's a very intelligent player too. He's a very smart guy. He's always in the right spot. I think he covers a little bit better than people get credit for, and I think he has really good ball skills. I mean, that's what all those Arizona guys, him, Stukes, and Genesis Smith. That's what they're getting turnovers like crazy. They're pick machines. I think they had like 10 interceptions between those guys, so you can see how those guys really made a lot of plays, and it was kind of hard to throw the football on them. And a lot of teams, that did go and beat Arizona, they had to run the football on them to kind of, take away from that. Because, Dalton Johnson, while he's a solid tackler, there are some instances where, he can miss some tackles. He's a smaller guy, but he is tough. He'll get in the trenches and things like that, and you can move him around a lot. I think that's, the versatility that Stukes and Johnson bring is going to be so beneficial for the defense because, Johnson, you can put him in the box a little bit, right? I think he can go in there and play in the box. Now, like I said, there might be some instances where he missed some tackles, but he's a tough guy. He's going to be in there. He's going to get in that mess, right? And he's not going to really back down from it. So you can kind of put him in the box too. He has a good range too, really good range. He has an interception against BYU that's pretty special where he kind of comes across the whole side of the field and makes a pick. So he has that range as well. So you can move him around. You can put him in the slot. You can cover guys in the slot too, and so he's such a versatile safety where you could just put him anywhere on the field and he'll make some plays. I think, the future of the Raiders is Stukes and Johnson kind of be that tandem, in my opinion. So I'm really excited to see what he can do in training camp and see how he makes his mark, because that's going to be that growth, and maybe see if he can, start to get some more snaps as the season goes along. So I think that's going to be his growth too, is how does he kind of weed his way in there into the lineup, because he does have that ability to kind of do everything on the field.
You brought up Traden Stukes. As you kind of start taking a look at like how his role could emerge, and perhaps even a job that he can take, how do you feel he is going to progress in these early parts of camp, and perhaps even in the preseason? Because we saw how he in college as a pure coverage player, he can play outside, but he's very good at locating the ball.
Yeah, he's another guy with great ball skills, and he's another player who's great in the slot too. I think what Stukes is going to get a chance to do, I think he's going to have that kind of. He's going to be what Johnson is going to be later on. I think Stukes is going to get that opportunity right away because he has the same ability where he can play anywhere, right? And he's a better tackler than Johnson. Definitely he's probably the most consistent tackler out of those safeties that played for Arizona. And I think that's where, he's going to get his chance to really develop and be that guy because, Jeremy Chin is on his last year of a contract, so you're going to see maybe Stukes kind of, share snaps with him in certain places because, against certain matchups, against certain teams, you might want Stukes to be down there, especially against certain tight ends like Travis Kelce and some of these other guys that that play tight end are pretty good in the NFL. The tight end's getting better and better in the NFL. You want a guy like Stukes because he has that size and the ability to kind of hang with these more athletic tight ends that are out here. And, he could definitely hang with, even some smaller guys. And, sometimes those guys might give him a little bit of issues, kind of the smaller slot receivers, but he still has that ability to kind of recover, and he has the great ball skills to understand what's happening in front of him and just his what I would say, his knowledge of what's the concepts and what just football teams want to do and against certain coverages and certain looks and certain things. He has a great understanding of that, and that's why I think he's going to start playing early. I think that's one guy that out of this rookie class we're definitely going to see week one, in my opinion. And I think he's even if he doesn't get like 60% of the snaps, he's going to get like 50 or 40%, and he's going to be out there learning and getting those reps really early on. So Stukes, to me, out of this defense and out of this defense class, I think he has the most upside of what he could be and how good he really could be because I think there's just so much that he can do. I talk about Dalton Johnson a lot, but Stukes is basically kind of Dalton Johnson, but, they went rounds higher for a reason. So kind of has that same versatility too, but Stukes just has that potential to me to kind of become that Pro Bowl guy.
Yeah, I completely agree. One other for you, for me anyway, Kion Sloan, the outside linebacker from North Carolina State. He and Kieron Crawford, I think, are going to be a couple of rookies that have a chance to make your mark. Can you talk about both of those guys and the roles that might be out there for them?
Starting with Sloan, I think Sloan's role is definitely going to be what they want to do in this 3-4 linebacker when they have the kind of these 3-4 sets that they want to do and these oversets. And, just because Sloan does a great job of playing in space. He definitely has that old school natural 3-4 outside linebacker feel to him where, you can kind of put him in space and put him back in coverage. And I think Kieron Crawford has the same thing as well. So both those guys kind of fit, when they said they're doing 3-4, a lot of people, kind of, make a smirk, be like, who plays 3-4 anymore? Or like, everybody plays nickel. But when you draft two guys that do that, it kind of lets you know exactly what they're trying to do because Crawford can play in space and then Sloan can play in space as well. So when you see both these guys be able to kind of play in space and then also rush the passer, I think Crawford is definitely more developed as a pass rusher than Sloan. I think Sloan has to get more pass rush plan and kind of just not just kind of depend on his athleticism because he's a very, very athletic guy, but he does have the short arms and things like that. So he's got to find a way to win, kind of how to win with the arm length that he has because that's going to be the detriment to him is you facing some of these long tackles and they're just going to be able to get their hands on really quickly, especially in the NFL when these guys are top notch with their technique and they understand these things and they watch film and study these edge rushers they're going against. So I think that's what Sloan has to figure out how he's going to win in the NFL with that arm length because that's going to be his issue. But I think he kind of has that ability to kind of play in space. And I think Kieron Crawford, I think he's the type of guy who you're going to see him just rush the passer really well year one. I think it's something he just naturally does. He has this very what I would say, very great bend. He has this great bend. He's able to kind of get around the corner, able to get to the quarterback. He's got to learn how to finish a little bit better, but he has that ability to get there. I mean, you see all the pressures he had. But they only added up to about 6 sacks, and that's where you got to learn how to finish when you're getting that pressure. You got to learn how to kind of just sometimes you don't have to get the most bend on certain things, and or maybe you could just push through a guy. So he's got to get stronger there too, so you can learn how to finish and get those sacks. But his ability is he has a lot lot of upside too. Like there's a lot of upside with him where he could become that pass rusher where he's playing across with Maxx Crosby or whoever's the other guy around there. So I think he has a chance to really grow year one, and I want to see what he looks like in camp too, because I think this could be a big thing for him to kind of make some noise.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, Crawford, a self-made man, plays angry, and just even going to a further extent, like between Sloan and Crawford, how much will they challenge Kwity Paye for playing time?
I think it'd be Crawford more than anything. I think Sloan is just going to have to develop a little bit and try to find a getaway. Just because when you do come in and drafted, sometimes they kind of pitch you at the bottom and you got to work your way up, right? Exactly. He's got to be a special teams guy. He has to get on special teams and kind of make his way there. I think there's, really show that effort, and so he could maybe try to get into that lineup and make sure he makes the team. And I think Crawford. I think Crawford. He's going to get his chances on third down. I think Kwity Paye is going to. He's going to be that first and second down guy no matter what. I think because that's what he does best. He plays a run. He definitely can set the edge. He does a good job doing those type of things. And of course, he can't rush the passer, but maybe if they end up moving him around a little bit, I think he's the type of guy just because he doesn't have that natural bit as a defensive end. So you can kind of move him around and get him some better matchups, as a defensive line. So I think Crawford would probably maybe on some pass rush down starting to eat into his snaps, but it also depends on how Malcolm Kuntz looks as well. I think Kuntz is probably that guy that maybe Crawford has that most competition with right now, in my opinion. Because if Kuntz doesn't take that next step, Crawford kind of has that same skill set, right? And even coming out when he I kind of see a lot of similarities between those two, because I think Malcolm Kuntz was kind of just as raw as Crawford was when he came out. Kuntz had that year where it all came together, and he had the injury and he kind of fell off, but I think that would be a little bit more of the competition. If Kuntz, he's on that 1 year deal, and then you draft basically your clone. It's kind of let's see how that motivates Kuntz, and if it doesn't happen, then you can see a little bit from Crawford getting some more snaps there.
Talking to Marcus Johnson from Tape Dolan Live. What do you need to see from Jack Bech in training camp?
What I want to see from Jack Bech is I want to see him be very involved. I want to see him like just in different ways. That means like if he is out there making some blocks, out there to getting some timely catches, just being consistently involved, because if he starts to kind of fade off a little bit and like I said, I know they are going to run the ball, but in camp they run the ball in camp, of course, but there's going to be a lot more working on the passing game and things like that, just because the way camp is, especially before they get the pads on. So I want to see him be involved, just be out there making catches, making some plays, right? If they do in red zone sessions, he's getting some touchdowns. Just be involved and finding ways to get those targets, show that he's earning those targets, being able to beat some wide receivers, and just embracing the role that he's given. Because he's not getting the number one receiver role, and he's got to embrace that role that he's given, and he's going to just do it to his best of his ability. But that's really what I want to see. I want to see him out there making plays. I mean, that's what fans want to see. They want to hear him making plays, and I think it's going to be big for him to kind of stand out, so he earns those targets when you get into the season. Because that's how you're going to earn them right now. Is just kind of standing out, making some plays, beating some guys, showing that effort, especially in training camp, and I think that's what he's got to do. Because I think last year he had a lot of catches where he was had that ability to kind of get those first downs and things like that and move the chains, and that's what you want to see from him too. Is in camp, is he that chain mover? Is he keeping the offense moving when they're doing 11-on-11s and team drills, or they're in 2-minute drills? Is he helping the offense stay on the field? So I think those are the things that would be really important for Jack Bech, and I could see that with him, just because I think he has that work ethic, and I think the roles that they're going to play for him is going to help him out a little bit. So I really believe that he can do that. He's just got to make some plays and kind of stand out.
You spoke last week about Spencer Burford and how you kind of watched him and maybe getting a better understanding of what this offensive line could look like, especially with the wide zone runs. How difficult will it be for somebody behind Burford, or even perhaps somebody at the right guard position, to go and break through? We're talking to guys like Trey Zune and Caleb Rogers.
It's gonna be tough. I'm gonna be honest. It's gonna be tough for them to kind of beat out Spencer Burford. I think Burford, just because his understanding of what they want to do on offense is kind of just a little bit higher than what these other guys, especially the systems they came from with Caleb Rogers and some of these other guys, and just running what Chip Kelly was doing. And then, I know Greg Olsen came in a little late, but, you can't add too many things. So Spencer Burford, he's with Klint Kubiak in 2023 when they're in San Francisco. So, he just has that veteran appeal. And I think that's when you're offensive line and you kind of go into week one, sometimes you're probably going to go with the veteran guy. So, as much as I want Caleb Rogers to win that job, and, hopefully maybe he does. I mean, that's what we want, because you want that young guy to kind of take that step and kind of just beat him out and beat out a veteran. He has to show attention to detail to beat out Burford. I mean, that's what really is going to be out, because Burford's not going to make attention to detail mistakes. When you watch him on film, and of course there's some things wrong with him, especially in true pass protection. But when it comes to the run game, he can get it done, and that's the thing. Like, so if that attention to detail that he has, he's never in the wrong spot of wide zone. He never takes false steps. He doesn't miss a guy or anything like that. He's always getting to the right guy. Those things are all there. So that attention to detail, Caleb Rogers and Trey Zune and those guys behind him, they really have to show that to get to really, I would say, to overtake Burford, because he has that. And if they don't, and they're still making mental mistakes, he's not going to make them. So that's going to be the hardest part for like a Caleb Rogers and those type of guys to beat him out, just because Burford has that attention to detail that they really want to see from offensive linemen. And he just doesn't make those small mistakes that annoy coaches. And of course, in pass protection, you're given a pressure that annoys coaches, but when it comes to the run game and things like that, he just has that on top of them. So unless he just has a really bad training camp, in pass protection, which could happen, right? I mean, it could happen. He's just getting beat out there, and they decide they can't put him out there if they want to pass the football. But like I said, that attention to detail that he has, that's what puts him over the top a little bit. So it's gonna be a tough road for Caleb Rogers and Trey Zune, the guys, to get on the field.
Marcus Johnson, Tape Don't Lie. You always bring the heat. What do you got working on over at Tape Don't Lie as we get prepared for training camp?
So we're doing a training camp battle. So this episode is be dropping today. We're doing DJ Glaze and Charles Grant. So we're looking at those two guys and how they match up. And I feel like that's kind of one of the main battles on the offensive side is that Glaze for Charles Grant. I really feel like that's where we're going to see them go at it throughout this training camp, and we're going to see who's going to be the winner at the end of it. And then next week, on this weekend, we're going to be doing Jonah Laulu and Tonka Hemingway. So we're going to be diving into the defensive tackles a little bit, just getting ready for training camp and just looking at some of these young guys and see who's going to get better and what they did last year.
Great stuff, Marcus. Thank you so much. This is dynamite information you give us at the right time, right, Vinny?
Absolutely. Truly appreciate it, Marcus Johnson. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work. We'll talk to you again next week. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
You got it. That's Marcus Johnson from Tape Don't Lie. They always do a really good job, and especially with some of those under the radar guys that we're talking about, and I'm really intrigued, Clay, with guys like Malik Benson, with guys like Kion Sloan, with guys like, I don't think Keon Crawford is necessarily an under the radar guy, but Dalton Johnson certainly fits that bill. There's a lot of young, intriguing players that the Raiders have put together, I'm super excited about seeing them in training camp.
It seems like there's a purpose. Yeah, they're on the radar because there was a purpose for them. It seems like they're on this roster for a reason, and the way they're going to be fighting for battles, even more so.
Yep, absolutely. It's the Morning Tailgate, Raider Nation Radio, 9:20 a.m. Vinny Bonsignore, Clay Baker, and Connor doing his thing as well. Taking your calls at 702-365-9200.
Vince, Vinny, and Clay want to hear from you. Call or text the show at 702-365-9200. Now, back to the Morning Tailgate.
Our thanks again to Marcus Johnson from Tape Don't Lie. Always brings some really good information, and truly appreciate him, especially as we've been talking about today. on some of those under the radar players. Obviously, everyone has their eyes on Fernando Mendoza. Everybody has their eyes on Traden Stukes, the second round pick from Arizona. Maxx Crosby, Brock Bowers, Ashton Genty. But man, you need to get contributions from so many different players, and sometimes surprisingly so. And that's why we're talking about some of these under the radar players as we head to training camp. The Kion Sloans, the Dalton Johnsons, the Malik Bensons, lower draft picks or undrafted free agents who have a chance to come in and make their mark. By the way, welcome back to the Morning Tailgate on Raider Nation Radio, 9:20 a.m. And Clay, is there anyone else that you have in mind in terms of those under the radar players that you're going to keep an eye on in training camp?
I'd like to read a couple from the text line at 702-365-9200. Gage in the 620 says, I'll give you two. He goes, I really think Dante Thornton is going to have a good season, come up with a few clutch deep balls when we need it most. And he also adds Tonka Hemingway. Not many snaps last year, but definitely had production. I believe he'll be on the field a lot more. So Dante Johnson,
Dante Thornton.
I'm sorry, Dante Thornton, excuse me. All this Dalton Johnson talk. Dante Thornton is somebody that you're waiting for him to go and really mature and be that guy, not only to win the one-on-one battles, but also be somebody that can stay on the field and be a strong blocker. Those were things we did not see last year when given the opportunity. But Tonka Hemingway was somebody that up until week 14 had only had about 80 snaps combined with special teams and on the defense. But in those last 5 games, he really did have some production. In fact, the last game with just 27 snaps, he had 2 sacks and a tackle for loss. The game before that, with 27 snaps, he had a sack and a TFL. So this is somebody that makes you feel like, given the amount of time, maybe he was starting to get it. Maybe the game was kind of slowing down for him in a way that he was able to go and find the quarterback. But definitely when you feel like getting paired as the defensive line gets a little bit younger, it feels like Tonka Hemingway has a job to win.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad that he mentioned a couple of second-year players, because we always forget there's always these new toys in the new rookie draft class. There's a whole bunch of guys, still young players, that are on a development ascension. Of course, we're talking about Ashton Genty in that regard, the big step that he could take forward, which I believe is out there for him. And he doesn't have to improve one iota. It's really in a case of, with him, everybody else improving, the offensive line improving, because the skill set is there for him to take advantage of that. But Tonka Hemingway, a guy that put the work in last year, and when his number got called toward the end of the year, he definitely delivered and gave the Raiders something to think about and something to ponder. And all that hard work, all that development was put to good use, and he took it seriously. And when his moment came, he took control of that. Now Dante Thornton is a little bit different. I always felt last year that the Raiders felt like, hey, we've got this really raw, toolsy wide receiver who was coming from a limited offense at Tennessee, limited exposure and experience in college in general, at Oregon and at Tennessee. But just look at him and watch him run, and this is a guy that you can definitely put the adjective freak athlete out there about him. Let's get him on the field as quickly as possible. The issue with him, or what he's facing, is he just hasn't played enough in college, didn't play enough in college to be able to refine the wide receiver position and learn the intricacies of the position. And I felt like, Clay, they tried to force feed that a little bit.
Yeah.
There was a plan in place. It was like, look, let's just put him out there, let's throw him into the fire, and let's try to expedite the process. And it didn't necessarily go so well. It started out pretty well, but then it kind of petered out. And now I think there's a lot of work ahead of him now to really cash it in year 2.
Do you think there was a lesson learned by that staff as we were thinking, and how he was starting to connect with Geno Smith last year? Thornton was getting big deep balls. He seemed to be like a receiver that was going to be getting showcased a lot, especially just in the portions of practice that we were seeing. And it looked like, all right, this guy is definitely going to be a shining star, but it didn't really translate. And maybe just the staff just fell in too much in love of what they were seeing in practice.
Well, I don't know if there was necessarily a lesson learned. I think that and it's funny because a lot of the fans complained about players who didn't get a chance early on, and in this case, he was given a chance early on, really early actually, and what you learned about him was that the learning curve is a little bit steeper than maybe originally thought, and so they had to kind of reassess things and play other players. But that's the danger sometimes of putting a young player out there, and you're not really going to know until you put him out there and find out. So for the same reasons that maybe you question, hey, did they handle him correctly right there? But then there's the argument, why didn't you play Caleb Rogers earlier? Why didn't you play Charles Grant earlier? Why didn't you play J.J. Pegues earlier or more, right? And then you might be getting into the same exact situation that Dante Thornton was facing. So it's kind of a fine line, and it's a trial and error. Not everybody is on the same, not wavelength, but timeline. And I also think in Dante's case, as opposed to some of the offensive linemen that we just mentioned and some of the defensive linemen, there was literally a clear path to an opportunity. They just didn't have that kind of a wide receiver on their roster to really block him, right? So there was a real opportunity to go out there and play early because not only was there an opportunity, but there was actually a need as well.
Also from the text line, Funky Raider 31 from Strong Beach says, I can't wait to see Malik Benson, Jermon McCoy, and number 3, Michael Washington Jr. All right, we haven't brought him up yet, and that could be kind of sneaky, just in the fact that obviously Ashton Genty is your RB1, your running back 1, but the speed and the vision that Mike Washington Jr. showed with a 4.33 speed, he seems like also a scheme fit. But one thing's for certain is that if you're in college and you have a 9.6 yards per carry after the line of scrimmage, that shows you that could be an explosive player. Can that translate to the NFL? But that's definitely a guy that's under the radar.
Yeah, he is, and I think that it'll be interesting to see how that running back room kind of shakes out. Obviously, Ashton Genty is going to be the bell cow. I think we're all envisioning a role for him in terms of usage and in terms of percentage of the time that he's out there with the offense. That's probably going to approach Christian McCaffrey type numbers. I think that at the very least, that's kind of what Klint Kubiak was alluding to, and I think that Ashton Genty is more than ready and willing to accept that role. So then, what does that mean for whoever that number 2 back is, and what are you looking for in that number 2 back? Are you looking for somebody to come in to spell Ashton from time to time when he needs a little bit of a blow? I think Mike Washington is capable of doing that, and I think the Raiders would be excited about him in that role. But how much time would he actually get in that kind of a role? Or in addition to that, do you also want somebody that's a little bit of a change of pace, somebody that brings maybe a little bit some different dynamics as a role playing running back? Somebody that you have some packages for, and somebody that's not just being used to give Ashton Genty some rest, but somebody that you have some real vision for in terms of a package. And is that a Dylan Laube? Is that somebody that I'm hearing a lot of good things about Dylan Laube in terms of the work that he's put in, the improvements that he's made, and maybe a potential role that he might have for him. So when you're talking about that running back 2, what does that running back 2 role actually look like from the Raiders' perspective?
Snake Man chimes in and says, like most rookies, Zeke, sticky like molasses masses, will need to overcome obvious deficiencies at only 180 pounds. Under the radar, Raiders may be playing him in passing downs, only barring injuries, until he proves he can hold up in the run game. Perhaps that's what Klint Kubiak was alluding to when he had his message to Zeke. And God only knows what that means. When he was like, "Do you hear me, Zeke?" I don't know, but
I think we know. I think it was pretty clear, Clay. He's a player that his college career he's definitely got ball skills, but the physicality part of it is what people have wondered about, right? Because he's not the biggest guy. So I don't think it's even a case of him not wanting to be physical or wanting to be physical. It's just that, when you're that kind of a size player, that's going to be a little bit of a concern. So I think what Klint was saying is we see what you're able to do running wise. We see what you're able to do instincts wise. You've really intrigued us. You turned a light on with us. But now we need to see, because your role is going to a lot of your role is going to be about, we need you to come up and make plays in the run game, in the tackling game, and are you going to be good to go when those lights come on? So I think it was definitely a very clear message of, we loved what we saw so far, but we need to be able to trust you to be a physical player out there as well. Yeah,
and I also wondered if it was because of the 8 coverage penalties that Masses had acquired, if that's something that also needs to be cleaned up. John from the 530 was worried a little bit on the under the radar about Aiden O'Connell. He feels that this is a very verbose text. He says, I hear that trading for Aiden O'Connell for a 5th or 6th round does not make sense to me. He's far too valuable to give up a 5th or 6th round. And how many 5th or 6th round picks can actually win half their games with a terrible offensive line and terrible coaching and little experience in the NFL and be responsible for the highest scoring game in franchise history? Let's imagine if we trade him, Cousins gets hurt 5 weeks into the season. Who's backing up Mendoza when Mendoza comes in? Losing AOC for a 5th or 6th round pick is a non-starter for me. In fact, I'd be looking to trade. I wouldn't be looking to trade AOC unless somebody wants to blow us away with a great offer. Under the radar, Aiden O'Connell.
Yeah, I would say that a 5th round pick would be actually a nice offer for a player of that right now experience level and caliber. So I would not turn my nose up to that kind of a trade offer. And the other part of it is that he's going to, at the end of the year, if you're Aiden O'Connell, you're probably going to be looking for a situation where there's a more like this year. He's going to be the 3rd quarterback. One way or another, he's going to be the 3rd quarterback. If Kirk Cousins starts the season and Kirk Cousins, gets injured, let's say, they're not going to waste any time on getting Fernando Mendoza out there, right? And so, and in that situation, to however long Kirk Cousins would be out, now Aiden O'Connell would be your number 2 quarterback. But the fact of the matter is, he's probably going to start this year as your 3rd quarterback, and if you move on to next year and Kirk Cousins stays around as the backup to Fernando Mendoza, that's another a 3rd quarterback role. If I'm Aiden O'Connell, at the end of this year, I'm looking for a place where I can have a chance to potentially compete for a starting job, but without question, go someplace where there's a clear-cut role as the number 2 quarterback. So in that scenario, if he leaves, then you get nothing for him. So if you can get a 5th round pick at some point for Aiden O'Connell, after it's been firmly established that he's going to be your number 3 quarterback, that's not anything to turn your nose up on. But I like Aiden O'Connell. I think that he should have a market, whether it's this year in a trade or next year in free agency. I do believe that he has a future in this league, primarily as a backup quarterback, but something that you can rely on in a pinch. It's the Morning Tailgate on Raider Nation Radio, 920 AM.
Yeah, before we get out to a break here, I want to go ahead and give away some tickets, guys. I got some goodies here. I talked about this earlier in the show. I said that it's going to be an exciting week in Vegas the next couple of weeks. And coming up again on the 25th, I have a 4-pack of tickets to see the Las Vegas Aviators taking on the El Paso Chihuahuas at the Las Vegas ballpark. I drove by there the other day. It is a beautiful venue. I can't wait to get my wife out there and go and have a good old time at the ballpark. And if you're looking to go with your family, you're looking to bring some of your friends in town, I have a 4-pack to give away right now to caller number 9. Give me a call at 702-365-9200. Again, that's going to be caller number 9 at 702-365-9200.
This is the Morning Tailgate.
Oh, Paisan. Oh! Back up. I'll talk to him about it. I've been telling you for months now this guy's no good. I want to sit down. All right. Answer the phone. I want to sit down.
Hey! On Raider Nation Radio, 920.
Oh!
Welcome back to the Morning Tailgate Show, Raider Nation Radio, 9:20 a.m. It is the final sit-down. Clay, what do we got going today?
From the text line at 702-365-9200, we're getting your thoughts on your under-the-radar players. Who do you feel is, going to be need to keep an eye on? But getting your thoughts up there, and we see a lot of good thoughts, especially for guys who are kind of like in that mix and under the radar. And I've often wondered, like, even for somebody like Taron Johnson, who was an acquisition from the Bills, this is somebody that, one of those players that may not necessarily see a great stat line of production, but what he is able to do on the field doesn't necessarily require stats. His importance is there by being able to provide great coverage, but also trying to be able to provide that kind of sanctity where he's at the safety position, knowing that he can stop the run, a very good tackler, but also somebody that's not going to get beat deep late. And that was something that, as this defense starts to emerge as its identity, having somebody with experience and as a known commodity, that goes a long way.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting with me for Taron Johnson. Obviously, slot cornerback. That's the role that he's gonna play here, but what if Traden Stukes, can lock down that position? I know he's safety, but that we know that Traden can play all over the field, and he's going to play in the slot. He played a lot in the slot in college. What if he shows that he's somebody that can be relied on as a starter at that position? And the reason I asked that about Taron Johnson, his contract becomes guaranteed after the first week of the in It's $8 million and change. So that's interesting. The Raiders aren't in penny pinching mode by any stretch of the imagination. They're not trying to save money. I'm not suggesting that at all. But there is a decision to make at some point. And if you believe that Traden Stukes is ready to go at that position, and you feel good about Massis, in a role as well, and you know that Jeremy Chin can come down and play in the slot, I just wonder if somebody like a Taron Johnson is liable, perhaps, to be moved on. Maybe he could be moved on from also a trade candidate. Because again, it's they're going to have all the way up until that first week of the season to make a decision on him whether to keep it on the roster or not. I think he's probably going to stay on the roster, and they're going to pay him his money. It becomes, like I said, guaranteed after that first week of the season. But you never know what might happen with some of these under the radar players that the Raiders have, and especially Traden Stukes and his ability to play in the slot.
We talked with Myles Simmons a little bit about Aaron Donald and what his role might be. They're just taking a look at kicking the tires at the Rams facility. A texter coming in from the 213 says, I think if Donald comes back, it'll be for a full season and not something where he's in rotation. I think he wants to come back to be the best version of himself and not just after a few weeks. All right. Adam Schefter actually spoke about this earlier this week when seen at the Rams facility. What could that mean for Aaron Donald going forward in Los Angeles?
That he wanted to go there, work out, see how he felt, see how he reacted, see everything that went along with being back in pads on the football field, and seeing how it made him feel. Now, I don't know what he told him about that after he went through those workouts at the facility, but I really think it was just a trial method to see how his whole body reacted, how his mind reacted to being back out there.
That's Adam Schefter, ESPN. All right, Aaron Donald, 35. What would you see? Like, obviously, we're looking at best case scenarios for him to go and join an already stacked defense. But is this something where you feel like, all right, maybe he wants a little bit more from the Rams, and that's why he took that little tour?
No, not at all. They'll work out the money part of it, and I think the vision would be, and I think he would sign off on this vision, of being a rotational player. He's 35 years old. He hasn't played since, 2021. It's been a while since he's played. I don't think that he's under any illusions that he's going to go out there and play 90% of the snaps, which he historically did throughout his career. Maybe that might happen in a playoff game or in the Super Bowl if they get to the Super Bowl. But I think I'm not even saying think. I know what their plan is for him, at least early on and maybe throughout, and things might change again in the postseason. But it's somebody whose snap counts are going to be cut in half, basically, and they're going to try to get the most out of him in certain situations, i.e. passing situations, in passing downs, where now he can pair up with, a Myles Garrett and everyone else that they have on that roster. Because that's the other thing. They don't even really need him necessarily. They're a Super Bowl defense right now. Okay, you're going to be adding a great piece in Aaron Donald, to help and to supplement. But there's really no need to just run him into the ground from the very get-go and have him be play the percentage of snaps that he played in his heyday. It just doesn't really make any sense, because what are you going to ultimately get at the end of the season when you really need him, if that's the plan? That isn't the plan. The plan is 25 to 30 snaps, maybe even maybe not even 30 snaps per game, and let him get back into it and be somebody that can be an Aaron Donald type of a player for 30 snaps or so per game, which would be a high level of production and player in a smaller sample size, but also be able to utilize him strategically. So if you need him at the end of games to make plays, to help close out games, and he's going to be fresh to be able to do that later on in the season into the playoffs. And for them, they've got Super Bowl aspirations. So to have him as healthy and as physically fit as possible to play probably a bigger role at that stage.
The 323 texting in Robin Hemby, running back out of Indiana, as a possible under-the-radar pick. And Uncle Woodrow, a couple bites. He goes, no offense to the texter from earlier, but I'm tired of the AOC excuses. Trade him to the highest bidder. And he also likes Cody Lindenberg as his big sleeper.
Cody Lindenberg is somebody definitely to keep an eye on. I'm glad he was mentioned in this. Another second-year player. He kind of reminds me a little bit of that Dalton Johnson type of a guy. Somebody that may not have fit all the measurables and speed and this and that, but he's a really good football player. And I know that he's somebody that really opened up some eyes during the spring, and we'll see if he carries that into training camp. I want to say thanks to Marcus Johnson. I want to say thanks to Myles Garrett. Thank you to Clay. Thank you to Connor. Thanks to our callers. Thanks to our texters. Thanks to our listeners. We truly appreciate it. We'll be back at it tomorrow, 7 to 10 a.m. Don't forget to stay with Raider Nation Radio at noon to 2. We've got JT the Brick, and then at 2 to 5, Q Myers with Unnecessary Roughness. Keep it right here, AM 920 Raider Nation Radio.